Salt, a simple mineral we use every day. But in the Bible, it wasn't just seasoning. It was a weapon, a covenant, and even a curse. Did you know that salt was used to destroy cities, seal divine promises, and even purify the soul? In these stories, we'll uncover the hidden truth of salt in the Bible and how it might still be a spiritual weapon today. Welcome to Bible Stories, where we uncover the hidden truths of the Bible. Stories you've heard, but never like this before. So if you're ready to dive deep into the mysteries of Scripture, make sure to subscribe, like, and share this video with others who seek the truth. Across ancient civilizations, salt was more valuable than gold. It wasn't just a spice, it was currency, a preservative, and a symbol of power. But for the people of the Bible, salt held a deeper, more mysterious power. From the catastrophic fall of Sodom, where Lot's wife was turned into a pillar of salt, Genesis chapter 19, verse 26, to the words of Jesus in his Sermon on the Mount, declaring, "You are the salt of the earth." Matthew chapter 5, verse 13. Salt appears again and again, not by accident, but as a divine symbol woven into the fabric of Scripture. Salt was used to seal sacred covenants, purify offerings, and even curse conquered lands. Its presence in the Bible is a key to understanding spiritual truths hidden beneath the surface. Stay with us, and you'll discover how salt shaped history, faith, and spiritual warfare, and why it might still be a spiritual weapon today. In the ancient world where kingdoms rose and fell, where alliances were made and broken with the passing of seasons, one element remained constant: salt. But why was salt so important to God that he commanded it to be part of sacred rituals? To understand this, we must go back to the very heart of the Old Testament. In the book of Leviticus chapter 2, verse 13, God gives Moses a specific instruction: season all your grain offerings with salt. Do not leave the salt of the covenant of your God out of your grain offerings. Add salt to all your offerings. This was not a culinary suggestion. It was a divine command. Salt wasn't just sprinkled for flavor. It represented something eternal. In a world without refrigeration, salt preserved food from decay. It symbolized purity, preservation, and endurance. Just as salt prevents corruption in food, it served as a spiritual reminder to keep the covenant between God and his people uncorrupted, pure, and everlasting. But the meaning runs even deeper. In 2 Chronicles chapter 13, verse 5, we find these words: "Don't you know that the Lord, the God of Israel, has given the kingship of Israel to David and his descendants forever by a covenant of salt?" A covenant of salt. What does this mean? In the ancient Middle East, salt was a symbol of loyalty and friendship. Sharing salt with someone was a sacred act, a sign of trust and an unbreakable bond. To break a covenant sealed with salt was to betray not just the person, but the very essence of honor itself. God chose salt because it was more than just a mineral. It was a symbol that every Israelite understood. When they added salt to their offerings, they were reminded of their sacred, unchanging relationship with God, a relationship meant to endure, pure and preserved, just like the salt itself. But there's more. Salt was also connected to sacrifice. In the tabernacle, every grain offering was required to have salt. This wasn't optional, it was essential. The absence of salt would render an offering incomplete, even unacceptable. Why? Because salt represented God's eternal covenant, and without acknowledging that covenant, no sacrifice could be truly holy. Consider this. In Numbers chapter 18, verse 19, God speaks to Aaron saying, "Whatever is set aside from the holy offerings the Israelites present to the Lord, I give to you and your sons and daughters as your perpetual share. It is an everlasting covenant of salt before the Lord for both you and your offspring." Notice the words, everlasting covenant of salt. Salt endures through time. It doesn't rot. It doesn't decay. It stands as a symbol of God's promises, unchanging, steadfast, eternal. But here's a question to ponder. What makes salt so sacred that God himself would use it to seal his promises? Is it just because of its preserving power? Or is there a deeper, hidden truth embedded in this ancient mineral, waiting to be uncovered? As we continue this journey, we'll explore how salt was not just a sign of God's faithfulness, but also a weapon in spiritual warfare, a tool of judgment, and a symbol of divine influence. Salt. We've seen how it represents purity, preservation, and divine covenants. But what if I told you that the very same mineral used to seal promises was also used as a weapon of destruction? A mark of judgment that left cities desolate and barren for eternity. Let's journey to one of the Bible's most haunting stories, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. In Genesis chapter 19, verses 24 to 26, we read, "Then the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. Thus he overthrew those cities in the entire plain, destroying all those living in the cities, and also the vegetation in the land. But Lot's wife looked back, and she became a pillar of salt." The cities of Sodom and Gomorrah were infamous for their wickedness, their sins crying out to heaven. But what stands out in this dramatic account is not just the fire and brimstone, but Lot's wife. In a single, irreversible moment, she disobeyed God's command, looked back, and was transformed into a pillar of salt. But why salt? Why not ash or stone? Salt here symbolizes both judgment and preservation. Judgment for disobedience, frozen in time as a stark reminder, and preservation, not of her body, but of the lesson, a warning that echoes through the ages, crystallized in the form of salt. Now, this isn't just a symbolic story. Near the Dead Sea, archaeologists have uncovered salt formations eerily resembling pillars, standing like silent sentinels over a barren land. The area around the Dead Sea is rich with layers of salt and sulfur, with evidence of sudden, intense destruction. Some even point to ancient ruins believed to be remnants of Sodom, buried under ash and salt. Consider the Dead Sea itself, one of the saltiest bodies of water on earth, where nothing can live. A sea of judgment, a natural monument to the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. But Sodom wasn't the only place where salt was used as a tool of destruction. In Judges chapter 9, verse 45, we find another chilling account. Abimelek fought against the city all that day. He captured it, killed its people, destroyed the city, and scattered salt over it. Scattering salt over conquered land was an ancient practice, a curse to make the ground barren, unfit for crops, symbolizing complete and irreversible devastation. Salt, once a symbol of life and covenant, now became a mark of death and desolation. And this practice didn't stop in biblical times. Throughout history, armies have salted the earth of their defeated enemies to prevent their return. The Romans did this after destroying Carthage, ensuring that the once great city would never rise again. But what does this mean for us today? Salt isn't just a seasoning, it's a symbol of purity, of covenant, yes, but also of judgment. It reminds us that divine lessons are not just spoken, they're etched into the very earth, into history itself. Think about it. Lot's wife is long gone, but her story remains, preserved in salt, a testament to the consequences of disobedience. Now reflect on this. Is there a part of your life where you're looking back, holding on to what God has told you to leave behind? What lessons are crystallized in the salt pillars of your own journey? As we move forward, we'll uncover how salt wasn't just a sign of judgment, but also a symbol of influence and power, especially in the teachings of Jesus. Salt, we've seen it as a sacred covenant and a tool of divine judgment. But in the teachings of Jesus, salt takes on yet another role, a symbol of influence, purity, and spiritual identity. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 13, during the iconic Sermon on the Mount, Jesus speaks to his disciples and says, "You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot." At first glance, this might sound like a simple metaphor, but for the people listening to Jesus, fishermen, farmers, shepherds, salt wasn't just a kitchen staple. It was life itself. In a world without refrigerators, salt preserved food, protected it from decay, and kept it pure. Without salt, corruption would spread. Decay was inevitable. So when Jesus said, "You are the salt of the earth," he wasn't offering a compliment. He was declaring a mission. Salt preserves. Just as salt keeps food from spoiling, believers are called to preserve goodness, truth, and righteousness in a world that constantly decays under the weight of sin and corruption. Christians are the moral compass, the preservers of spiritual integrity, standing against the tides of injustice, immorality, and spiritual apathy. But salt does more than preserve, it enhances, it brings out flavor. Without salt, food tastes bland, lifeless. In the same way, believers are meant to bring out the flavor of God's kingdom, adding depth, purpose, and joy to the world around them. We're called to reflect God's love, grace, and truth in such a way that people taste and see that the Lord is good, as written in Psalm chapter 34, verse 8. But here's the warning Jesus gives. If the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? Salt that has lost its flavor is useless. It's no longer fit for preservation, no longer effective in enhancing anything. Spiritually, this is a call to self-reflection. Are we living as the salt of the earth, influencing our surroundings, preserving what is good, and adding the richness of God's grace to our communities? Or have we, somewhere along the way, lost our spiritual saltiness, becoming complacent, indifferent, or diluted by the world's values? Consider this real-life story. In 1854, during the Crimean War, Florence Nightingale, known as the Lady with the Lamp, revolutionized battlefield medicine. Amid the filth, disease, and death of war hospitals, she introduced something simple yet profound: cleanliness, sanitation, and yes, even the use of salt water to cleanse wounds. Her efforts saved countless lives. But it wasn't just the salt water that healed. It was her unwavering faith, her compassion, and her refusal to let darkness and decay have the final word. Florence Nightingale was the salt of the earth. She preserved life, fought against the corruption of neglect, and brought light where there was only darkness. And that's the call for each of us. You don't need to be on a battlefield to be salt. Your kindness, your integrity, your courage to stand for what's right. That's the saltiness Jesus spoke of. It's in the small daily acts where we preserve hope and add the flavor of God's love to the lives around us. So, here's a question for you. Are you living as the salt of the earth, influencing your surroundings for good? Or have you lost your spiritual saltiness? Comment below. What do you think Jesus meant when he called us the salt of the earth? How are you living that out today? But our journey doesn't end here. Salt's story in the Bible holds one final mystery, a connection to spiritual warfare and divine authority that stretches beyond the physical into the realms unseen. Throughout history, salt has been more than just a mineral. It has been a covenant, a weapon, and a symbol woven into the very fabric of faith. We've seen how salt was used as a covenant, a sign of loyalty and divine promises. Leviticus chapter 2, verse 13 reminds us, "Season all your grain offerings with salt. Do not leave the salt of the covenant of your God out of your grain offerings." This wasn't about flavor. It was about faithfulness, a permanent reminder that God's promises are unbreakable, enduring as the earth itself. We've witnessed salt as an instrument of destruction and judgment. In Genesis chapter 19, verses 24 to 26, Lot's wife looked back at the burning cities of Sodom and Gomorrah and became a pillar of salt, frozen in time as both a symbol of irreversible judgment and a lesson for generations to come. And we've discovered salt as a symbol of purity and influence. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 13, Jesus declares, "You are the salt of the earth," not just to preserve, but to prevent spiritual decay, to enhance the beauty of God's creation, and to influence the world with integrity and truth. But here's the hidden truth, the revelation that ties it all together. Salt wasn't just a symbol, it was a spiritual weapon. Think about it. In a world plagued by corruption, decay, and moral erosion, salt stands as a divine agent against everything that seeks to spoil what is good. It fights decay. It preserves life. It purifies. In the hands of the faithful, it becomes a weapon, not of violence, but of spiritual resilience. Salt is a marker of eternal promises, anchoring us to covenants that cannot be broken. It's a reminder of divine judgment, urging us to live righteously. And it's a call to live with purpose, to influence, to preserve, and to stand firm when the world tries to erode our faith. So now I ask you, how is salt present in your life today? Not just on your table, but in your heart, in your actions, in your influence. Are you preserving what is good? Are you standing against spiritual decay? Are you living as the salt of the earth, reflecting the covenant of God's promises? Because in the end, salt isn't just something you taste, it's something you live. What part of this story surprised you the most? Was it the covenant of salt, the judgment it brought, or the call to preserve the world around us? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear what stood out to you and how this teaching impacts your life today. If this video opened your eyes to the hidden truths of the Bible, give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Let's spread the wisdom of the scriptures far and wide. And don't forget to subscribe. We've only scratched the surface of these deep biblical mysteries, and we've got so much more to explore together. In our next episode, we'll explore another mysterious object in the Bible, one that changed history forever. You won't want to miss it. Stay curious, stay faithful, and we'll see you in the next episode.